My name is Willa Hartley. I'm 35. And if you'd asked anyone in my family to describe me growing up, they probably would have used words like quiet, independent, or responsible. Those were flattering words for something much uglier. I was invisible. My younger sister, Olivia. It was the child my parents built their world around. If our family had been a car, Olivia was the polished hood ornament everyone admired. I was the spare tire. Nobody thought about me until something went wrong. When Olivia turned 10, my parents rented half a bowling alley. There were balloons tied to every chair, 30 kids running between lanes, pizza boxes stacked across 2 tables, and a custom cake with her favorite cartoon character printed across the frosting. Mom handed me 2 cases of soda when we arrived. Willa, sweetheart, help me carry these inside. I remember walking behind everyone with 12 cans digging into each arm, while Olivia ran ahead, wearing a plastic birthday crown. When I turned 10, there was a card waiting on the kitchen counter before school. No cake, no balloons, no relatives. Mom kissed the top of my head while searching for her car keys. You're so mature. Willa, you don't need all that fuss. At 10 years old, I actually felt proud. That was the trick. They turned neglect into a compliment. Whenever someone noticed the difference, Mom had an explanation ready. Willa has always been independent. Dad would nod. She doesn't need people doing everything for her. As though I had chosen it. As though 10-year-old me had looked at affection, attention, birthday parties, and being celebrated and politely said, no thanks. Independence sounds better. Sarcasm became my private survival mechanism. By middle school, whenever Mom asked me to help prepare another party for Olivia, I'd think, excellent. Another shift at Hartley Family Catering. Still unpaid. I rarely said any of it aloud. That became evidence against me too. Because I didn't scream. They assumed nothing hurt. Because I didn't demand attention, they decided I didn't need any. And because I learned to solve my own problems, everyone eventually decided solving problems was simply my job. Olivia learned the opposite lesson. When she forgot homework, Mom sighed sympathetically. She has so much going on. If I forgot something, Willa, we expect better from you. If Olivia failed a test, Dad blamed the teacher. If I earned a B instead of an A, he asked, what happened? Olivia grew up expecting applause. I grew up expecting assignments, and for years, I convinced myself there was something admirable about that. Maybe they were right. Maybe I really was stronger. Maybe needing less made me better prepared for adulthood. What I didn't understand was that they weren't teaching me independence. They were teaching me to accept scraps without complaining. That lesson followed me well beyond childhood. By 25, I had a steady career, decent savings, and the dangerous combination of being financially responsible and incapable of letting people I loved crash. My parents noticed immediately. It began, innocently. Willa, could you cover the electric bill until Friday? Then, the car payment is going to be late. Then, your father's business is having a temporary cash flow problem. Temporary became one of my least favorite words. Dad's business seemed to have a temporary crisis every 6 months. The first major disaster was the mortgage. His company lost several clients. Payments fell behind. And one afternoon, Mom called me crying. There's something from the bank. I drove over. Foreclosure notice. They had less than 3 weeks before things became serious. I spent that night at their kitchen table, with my laptop open. Coffee going cold beside me. Speaking to the lender, while Dad paced behind my chair, I rearranged savings, moved money between accounts, Cancelled plans I'd been saving for. Finally, I wired enough to stop the immediate foreclosure process. The next morning, Mom hugged me so tightly, I almost believed something had changed. "I don't know what we'd do without you." That shook my hand. "You saved us." For one stupid moment. Those words meant everything. At dinner that evening, Olivia arrived, 20 minutes late, announcing she had started dating someone new. Within seconds, everyone was asking questions. Where had they met? What did he do? Was he handsome? Mom practically glowed. Nobody mentioned the foreclosure. Nobody mentioned the money. Nobody mentioned me. The house was still standing because of what I had done less than 12 hours earlier. And somehow I had already disappeared again. That became the pattern. Mom slipped on ice one winter and ended up with medical bills insurance didn't completely cover. I arranged the payment plan. I covered the shortfall every month. She never asked whether I could afford it. She simply assumed I would figure it out. At 30, the house nearly disappeared again. Dad's business had dipped again. They had also somehow missed property tax payments for 2 straight years. The amount required to stabilize everything was almost $20,000. I used savings and took out a personal loan. But that rescue came with paperwork. My name went onto the title. I co-signed the note. At the time, Dad called it just protection for everybody. I didn't argue. But something inside me had changed. I started keeping records, receipts, wire confirmations, bank statements, loan documents, screenshots, every dollar. I wasn't planning revenge. Not consciously. I think some part of me simply understood that one day, my family would conveniently forget everything I had done. By 32, I was paying or backing pieces of their car insurance, health coverage, property taxes, utilities, and whatever disastrous new business idea Olivia was convinced would finally make her rich. She talked about her ventures as though she were presenting on television. Dad always finished the pitch for her. "Your sister just needs somebody to believe in her." Apparently, belief came with routing numbers. Mom preferred emotional blackmail. Family helps family. Strange how that sentence only traveled in one direction. Nobody ever said, family shouldn't drain one daughter dry. Nobody said, maybe Willa wants savings of her own. Nobody asked what I was postponing so they could stay comfortable. By 35, I had automatic transfers set up for bills that weren't mine, backup cards on accounts I didn't use, calendar reminders for insurance policies attached to cars I didn't drive. I had spreadsheets managing the financial lives of 3 adults who still described me as the daughter who didn't need anyone. And slowly, painfully, I realized something. They weren't grateful anymore. Gratitude requires knowing someone is giving you something. My family had stopped seeing my help as help. To them, it was infrastructure. The lights turned on. The mortgage stayed current. Olivia's business survived another month. Problems disappeared. Willa handled them. That was simply how the world worked. They had built their lives on top of me so completely that they no longer noticed I was underneath them. And because I never let them fall, they began believing they knew how to fly. I had no idea that within weeks, they would make the mistake that finally changed everything. They were going to tell me I wasn't family, and for the first time in my life, I was going to believe them. The family meeting happened on a Saturday. Everyone was invited, except me. I didn't find out from Mom, not Dad, not Olivia, not even Aunt Kimberly, who somehow always knew everybody's business before the people involved did. I found out because my cousin Tyler texted me Friday afternoon, "You going to the big family talk tomorrow?" I stared at the message. What family talk? 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Your mom said everyone needs to be there. Another message followed less than a minute later. Wait. You weren't told? I actually laughed. Of course I wasn't. By then, Being excluded should have felt normal. But something about this was different. A formal family meeting. At the house, I had helped save twice. With electricity, I had repeatedly kept connected, property taxes I had been covering, insurance payments tied to my cards. And apparently the woman helping hold all of it together wasn't important enough to receive an invitation. Classic. Saturday evening. I drove over anyway. I didn't call first. The driveway was packed. Dad's truck, Olivia's car, Caleb's sit-in. A couple relatives I recognized. Aunt Kimberly wasn't physically there. But I spotted her face on a laptop when I looked through the dining room doorway. I entered through the side door. Nobody noticed me. They were too busy discussing their favorite subject. Me. She thinks she's better than us. Olivia's voice. I stopped in the hallway. She was leaning back in her chair. One arm draped across the back, like she was giving testimony before a jury. Caleb sat beside her. He nodded. Honestly, every holiday feels uncomfortable when Willa comes over. She barely talks. She just watches everybody. I almost smiled. Apparently, existing quietly was now an act of aggression. Dad folded his arms. We've been too generous with her. That nearly made me choke. Too generous. My credit card was paying one of the bills sitting unopened on the counter behind him. Mom spoke next. Her voice was calm. That somehow made it worse. She's always keeping score. You can feel it. I looked down at my purse. Inside was my phone containing a spreadsheet of their mortgage contributions, insurance payments, tax payments, medical bills, and business transfers. For once, Mom was right. I had started keeping score. Because nobody else remembered the score existed. Olivia shook her head. She makes people feel small. Aunt Kimberly's voice crackled from the laptop. You've all been patient with her. I honestly don't know how you've tolerated this attitude for so long. That did it? I laughed. Out loud. Every head turned. Mum's face went pallid. Olivia sat upright. Dad stared at me like I had broken into the house. Caleb whispered something under his breath. I stepped into the dining room. Sorry. Please continue. Nobody spoke. I pulled out an empty chair. Well, Olivia finally found her voice. What the hell are you doing here? Tyler mentioned the family meeting. I sat down. Apparently, my invitation got lost somewhere between the mortgage statement and the electric bill. Dad's jaw tightened. This doesn't concern you. I looked around the table. You've been discussing me for at least 10 minutes. Silence. So I'm fascinated to hear how this doesn't concern me. Mom leaned forward. You weren't supposed to be here. Yeah. I gathered that. I crossed one leg over the other. But I've already heard that I'm judgmental. Arrogant. Quiet. Uncomfortable to be around. And apparently the beneficiary of your overwhelming generosity. I glanced at Dad. That last one was particularly creative. Olivia rolled her eyes. There. That's exactly what we're talking about. What? That attitude. What attitude? You always have to make some sarcastic comment. I nodded slowly. You're right. I'll be serious. I looked directly at her. What exactly have Mom and Dad been generous about? Olivia opened her mouth. Nothing came out. So I helped. The mortgage. Dad shifted. The property taxes. Mom looked away. Your business. Olivia's expression hardened. Caleb frowned. I could tell from his face. There were details he had never been told. I continued. Mom's medical bills. Insurance utilities. Enough. Dad snapped. There it was. The emergency brake they pulled whenever facts became inconvenient. I leaned back. You're right. Keep going. This is your meeting. Mom inhaled slowly. For one ridiculous second, I expected an apology. Instead, she looked me straight in the eye. You're not welcome here anymore. Something inside me went perfectly still. she continued. You can quit pretending you're part of this family. Olivia watched me. Caleb looked uncomfortable now. But he said nothing. Dad's arms remained crossed. Then Mom delivered the sentence I would remember for the rest of my life. We're done carrying you. Silence. Not shocked. Silence. Agreement. Nobody defended me. Nobody laughed and said she'd gone too far. Aunt Kimberly actually nodded from the laptop. Olivia's mouth curved into a tiny, satisfied smile. And suddenly, 15 years rearranged themselves in my head. Every check, every transfer, every emergency call, every holiday where I received a generic card, after paying bills that kept this house functioning. Every time they said, family helps family. They had genuinely rewritten reality until they believed they were helping me. I didn't cry, didn't yell, didn't explain. I smiled. Okay. Mom blinked. Apparently she expected resistance. What? I said okay. I stood. Then, I'll end every payment tonight. Olivia laughed. Actually laughed. Oh. Please. Dad shook his head. Stop being dramatic. Willa. Caleb muttered. Here we go. Even Aunt Kimberly joined in. She won't do it. I pushed my chair neatly beneath the table. Then I looked at each of them. You think I'm bluffing? Nobody answered. Kute. I picked up my purse. Guess we'll find out. I walked out. Nobody followed. That was the strangest part. They were so convinced I would come crawling back that they let me leave. The front door clicked shut. I stood on the porch for maybe 3 seconds. No tears. No shaking. Just clarity. They thought they had cut me loose. What they had actually done was cut themselves loose from me. I drove home, kicked off my shoes, opened my laptop, and pulled up the folder I'd been building for years. 15 years of their financial lives sat neatly organized in front of me. They wanted Willa Hartley out of the family. Fine. Family benefits were ending too. I started with the stupid things. Streaming services. Netflix. Cancelled. Hulu. Cancelled. Spotify. Family plan. Cancelled. A few premium subscriptions Olivia probably didn't even remember I paid for. Gone. Petty. Absolutely. Satisfying. More than it should have been. Then I moved higher. Utilities. My card had been their backup payment method for years. If their checking account came up short, mine quietly caught the balance. I removed it. Electricity. Water. Gas. No backup. Next came insurance. Olivia had been receiving coverage through a plan I controlled because she had never bothered arranging proper coverage herself. I submitted the paperwork to remove her at the earliest date legally allowed. Mom and Dad had separate policies. I wasn't insured on them. I was simply paying their premiums. So I removed my card. Same with their vehicles. Same with homeowners insurance. I didn't cancel policies that weren't legally mine to cancel. I simply stopped being the person paying for them. Then property taxes. For 6 years, I had quietly kept that house from slipping into another crisis. Autopay off. Confirmation saved. The house they called their legacy was finally going to have to survive on their money. Then I opened Olivia's business folder. That one was complicated. Her company had a credit line that existed largely because of my guarantee. The review date was approaching. I called the bank's after-hours service, documented my position, and followed up electronically. I would not renew my personal guarantee without adequate collateral. Olivia would have to stand behind her own business. What a revolutionary concept. Then, something bothered me. There had always been little inconsistencies in my credit reports. Accounts I didn't immediately recognize. Small balances. Nothing large enough to trigger panic. I'd assumed they were reporting errors or forgotten paperwork. That night, I stopped assuming. I pulled everything. And there they were. 2 loans. My name. My information. my supposed signatures, except I had never applied for either one. I enlarged the documents. The signatures looked like mine from a distance. Up close. Wrong angle. Wrong pressure. Wrong shape on the W. I knew exactly who had done it. Olivia. My stomach turned cold. This wasn't entitlement anymore. This was fraud. I downloaded every document, saved copies in 3 locations, filed disputes, placed fraud alerts, started the identity theft reporting process. Then, I created a new folder, Olivia Fraud, for years. I'd wondered how far my family would go if I ever stopped helping them. Apparently, Olivia had already answered that question. The clock on my laptop read 2:43 a.m. When my phone started vibrating, Olivia, I declined. It rang again, declined, again. By the 19th missed call, I was almost impressed. The 20th time, I answered, "What?" Her voice exploded through the speaker. "What the hell did you do?" I leaned back in my chair, exactly what I said I would. "My business card isn't working. The bank says there's an issue with the credit line. I got an insurance notice." "What did you do? Sounds like you've got some problems to solve. You can't just cut us off." I said nothing. Then she used the word I knew was coming. "We're family." I laughed quietly. "Interesting." "What?" "Because a few hours ago, Mom told me I wasn't." "You took that wrong." "No." "Olivia." For once, I took it exactly right. We were frustrated. Frustrated is arguing over dinner. You organized a family meeting without inviting me. Spent 20 minutes tearing me apart. And then Mom told me to stop pretending I belonged. She went quiet. I opened the forged loan documents on my screen. And Olivia, "What?" "We're gonna have another conversation soon." Her breathing changed. "About what?" I stared at the fake signature. "You'll find out." "Willa, you've had 15 years to learn how to stand on your own?" I closed the laptop. Time to start. I hung up. The phone immediately rang again. I turned it off. Then I sat in the darkness of my apartment and listened to something I hadn't heard in years. Nothing. No emergency. No guilt. No family member demanding I fix what they'd broken. Just silence. Except this time, the silence belonged to me. By sunrise, their safety net was gone, and they were already falling. By morning, I had a banker's box sitting beside my front door. Inside were copies of everything: dates, loan agreements, insurance records, bank statements, business documents, tax receipts, wire transfers. 15 years of evidence proving exactly who had been carrying whom. The originals were locked somewhere. My family couldn't touch. At 10 that morning, I drove back to my parents' house. The neighborhood looked completely normal. Kids rode bicycles along the sidewalk. Sprinklers clicked across green lawns. Somebody, 2 houses down, was washing a car. But my parents' place looked different. The blinds were closed. Dad's truck sat crooked in the driveway. The front door was slightly open. Before I could knock, Olivia pulled it wider. She looked terrible. Her hair was messy. Her eyes red. And she was wearing the same sweatshirt she'd had on the night before. Thank God. I almost laughed. 24 hours earlier, I wasn't family. Now I was apparently divine intervention. "Relax," I said, stepping inside. "I'm not here to save anybody." Olivia followed me. "Then why are you here?" I lifted the box to show you what saving you looked like. The living room looked like someone had robbed an accounting office. Papers covered the coffee table. The family safe stood open. Folders were scattered across the floor. Mom sat stiffly on the couch while Dad flipped frantically through a stack of documents. "The house deed isn't here," he said. Mom looked at me. "Neither are some of the investment documents." I placed the box on the dining table. The paper deed you're hunting for isn't magic. Title is recorded with the county. Dad looked up. And my name is on it. Silence. Olivia slowly shut the front door. Dad stood. What do you mean? I opened the box and removed a copy of the property records. Remember the second foreclosure scare? His face tightened. I put nearly $20,000 into saving this place. I took out a personal loan. Part of the restructuring put me on the title and note. I laid the document down. My name sat there in black ink. Willa Hartley. Mom stared at it. Dad grabbed the page. You can't hold our house hostage. Your house? I looked around. I've paid the property taxes for 6 years. I've helped stop foreclosure twice. I've covered insurance gaps and emergency payments. I tapped my name. So maybe we should stop pretending my involvement was imaginary. Olivia stepped closer. What about my company? I looked at her. What about it? The bank froze everything. No. The bank reassessed what happens when I stop guaranteeing your risk. You knew that would happen. Of course I knew. Her face twisted. You're trying to destroy me. No? I reached into the box. Actually, you did something much more interesting. I pulled out the first fraudulent loan application. Olivia froze. Not dramatically. Just completely. Her eyes locked on the page. Mom noticed. What is that? I placed it on the table. Luan. Dad frowned. So, in my name. Another sheet landed beside it. And another one. Mom looked from the papers to Olivia. I watched my sister's face lose color. I don't know anything about those. Really, I don't. I pointed to the signature. That's supposed to be mine. Dad picked up the application. Maybe you forgot signing it. I laughed. That's your explanation. People forget paperwork. I didn't forget. I looked directly at Olivia. And whoever forged my signature didn't do a particularly good job. Mom whispered. Forged. Olivia finally moved. This is insane. I've already filed disputes and fraud reports. Her head snapped toward me. You what? I protected myself. You reported me. Interesting. I hadn't actually said her name. I tilted my head. I said I reported fraud. Olivia realized her mistake. Too late. Dad stepped between us. Stop this right now. Why? This has gone far enough. I stared at him. Someone takes loans out using my identity. And your concern is that I've gone too far. We can handle this privately. There it was. The Hartley family motto. When Olivia made a mistake. Protect Olivia. When Willa had a problem. Willa was independent. No. Dad blinked. What? We're not handling fraud privately. Olivia's voice cracked. I was going to pay them back. Mom covered her mouth. Dad turned toward her. Olivia. It wasn't supposed to matter. She looked at me desperately. You were already helping with everything. I just needed temporary capital. I almost admired the insanity of that sentence. So because I was already paying your bills, stealing my identity didn't count. I didn't steal anything. You forged my signature. I was going to fix it, before or after the bank discovered it. Mom stood. Villa. Please. I held up my hand. No. Her mouth closed. For once. Nobody gets to say, family helps family, and make this disappear. I reached into the box again. Olivia's incorporation documents. Loan guarantees. Operating account paperwork. I spread them across the table. Your business survived because I guaranteed financing after the last bailout. I also have ownership rights from the restructuring. Olivia. Starrett. You said that was temporary. I said I was protecting my money. Then came the investment statements. My parents loved referring to these as family investments. At barbecues, Dad talked about them like he'd personally built an investment empire. The accounts told a different story. My name, my tax information, my money. They had enjoyed returns. They hadn't built them. I placed insurance documents beside those. Then property tax receipts. Then mortgage transfers. Then Mom's medical payments. Then utilities. One after another. The table slowly disappeared beneath 15 years of their independence. Dad's face turned red. You're going to destroy this family because your feelings got hurt. That almost broke my composure. Not because it hurt, because it was absurd. I laughed. I'm not destroying anything. I gestured toward the papers. I'm stepping back. Mom's eyes filled. Willa. Honey. We were angry. No. You were comfortable. She flinched. You knew I'd always fix everything. So you thought you could treat me however you wanted. We said things we didn't mean. I pulled out one final page. A printout of the family group chat. Mom's message sat near the bottom. Don't bother visiting anymore. We're done with you. Beside it was Aunt Kimberly's heart reaction. I placed it in front of Mom. That doesn't look accidental. She stared down. Nobody spoke. I started returning documents to the box. Olivia suddenly sounded frightened. What happens now? I'm seeing a lawyer. Dad slammed his palm onto the table. You're not taking this house. I didn't say I was. Then what are you doing? Separating my finances from yours properly. I closed the box. Anything I legally own stays mine. Anything I'm legally responsible for gets reviewed. Anything belonging to you becomes your responsibility. Mom stepped toward me. We can't afford all of this. I looked at her. For years. That sentence would have activated something inside me. Panic. Responsibility. The need to fix it. This time, nothing. Then, you'll have to make changes. Willa. You wanted independence from me. I lifted the box. Congratulations. I walked toward the door. Dad followed. You can't do this to us. I stopped, turned, and looked at the three people who had spent most of my life teaching me that love had conditions. I'm not doing anything to you. I opened the door. I'm finally doing something for myself. Then I left. The first real collapse came during the second week. Olivia's company couldn't survive without accessible credit. Suppliers stopped extending terms. A major client demanded overdue work be resolved. Olivia started calling friends for loans. Nobody volunteered. I heard about it from one of her old college friends. Your sister's business is basically dead. He told me. She's asking everyone for money. I shrugged. Maybe she should ask the family. He laughed. I didn't. Then came the house, without me quietly covering property tax problems. Notices arrived. The insurance payment situation made things worse. The mortgage company became nervous. Deadlines stacked up. Dad tried moving money around. But there wasn't enough money to move. Their proud family home entered pre-foreclosure trouble. That's when the voicemails changed. At first, you can't walk away from family. Then, do you understand what you've caused? Then, anger became fear. Mom left one late at night. Willa. We're drowning. Please. Just help us this once. We'll figure everything out afterward. I deleted it. Because there was always a this once. Then Caleb left Olivia. Apparently, Olivia had told him her company was profitable and that the financial trouble was temporary. When he finally saw the debts, frozen credit, and fraud investigation hanging over everything, he packed his things. The engagement ended. Olivia told people she'd broken it off. Nobody believed her. Aunt Kimberly lasted slightly longer before rewriting history. Her text arrived one afternoon. Willa. I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. Your parents are struggling. You've always been the dependable one. I know you wouldn't want them losing everything. I stared at it. Then opened the screenshot. from 3 weeks earlier. Her little heart reaction still sat beneath Mom's message telling me I wasn't family. I didn't respond. I simply added Kimberly's new message to my receipts folder. Then she made a bigger mistake. She started telling relatives that I had abandoned my parents, that I had become selfish, cold, vindictive. So I opened the extended family group chat. No speech. No emotional essay. I uploaded several documents: mortgage payments, property taxes, medical bills, business transfers, insurance premiums, years of bank records. Then I wrote one sentence: interesting definition of selfish. Silence. Kimberly stopped talking. By the end of the 3rd week, everything they had treated as permanent was disappearing. Olivia's company was gone. Her engagement was over. My parents' house was hanging by a thread. Their relatives knew the truth. And the daughter they had told to leave. I was sleeping better than I had in 15 years. My weekends belonged to me. My paycheck stayed in my account. I started hiking again. I booked the trip to Iceland. I'd postponed twice because somebody in my family always seemed to have an emergency. And for the first time, I started looking at houses. Not theirs. Mine. A small place across town caught my attention. Nothing extravagant. A modest yard. A garage. A kitchen. With sunlight coming through the back windows. I stood inside it during the viewing and realized something almost embarrassing. I couldn't remember the last major decision I'd made, purely because I wanted it. So I made an offer. It was accepted. And while my parents were desperately trying to keep their house from disappearing, I went under contract on one of my own. They thought cutting me out would teach me where I belonged. Instead, it finally taught me where I didn't. But my family wasn't finished. Because desperation had replaced anger. And desperate people will promise almost anything when they realize the person they threw away was the only thing keeping them afloat. 3 weeks later, my life looked different. More importantly, it felt different. The offer on the house had gone through. A few weeks after that, I had keys in my hand. It wasn't huge. 2 bedrooms. A modest backyard. A garage that smelled faintly, like sawdust and old paint. The kitchen had a wide window over the sink. And in the afternoons, sunlight stretched across the floor, in long golden rectangles. It was quiet. Mine. No emergency envelopes on the counter. No stack of somebody else's unpaid bills. No spreadsheet reminding me which adult needed rescuing next. Just my house. Before moving in, I finally took the trip I'd been postponing for years. Iceland. I'd canceled it twice before. Once because Dad needed money for property taxes. Once because Olivia had another temporary business crisis. This time, I boarded the plane. No guilt. No last-minute transfer. No apologizing for spending my own money. I stood beside a freezing waterfall, with wind ripping through my coat, and realized my phone had been silent for almost 6 hours. It felt unnatural. Then it felt incredible. When I came home, the family situation had become worse. Olivia tried reinventing herself as a consultant. Apparently, failure hadn't weakened her confidence. She created a website, called herself a business growth strategist, and started posting motivational quotes about resilience. Nobody hired her. Hard to sell financial wisdom when your last company collapsed after losing access to someone else's credit. Mom and Dad were still fighting the mortgage company. The house remained trapped in pre-foreclosure trouble. Every delay bought them time. None solved the actual problem. They didn't have enough money. For years, they had mistaken my money for theirs. Now, reality was collecting the difference. Aunt Kimberly stopped talking about me completely. After I posted the receipts in the family group chat, her campaign about my selfishness evaporated. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just silence. I was fine with that. But Mom and Dad didn't stop trying. They simply changed strategies. First came guilt. We're family. Willa. Then bargaining. Dad left a voicemail, offering me a partnership in his business. That almost made me laugh. The business barely existed anymore. Offering me part ownership was like offering me a cabin on a sinking ship. Then came desperation. Just help, until we're back on our feet. That sentence appeared again and again. Back on our feet. They still didn't understand. Their feet had been planted on my shoulders. Without me. They weren't temporarily unstable. They were finally experiencing the life their own decisions had created. Mom tried health guilt next. One message read, "I've been sick from all this stress. I hope you're happy." Months earlier, that would have ruined my day. I would have called, asked what was wrong, offered to pay for an appointment. That afternoon, I read it while assembling shelves in my garage. I put the phone down and kept tightening screws. That was when I understood the change wasn't temporary. I wasn't waiting for them to apologize anymore. I wasn't secretly hoping they'd choose me. I didn't need them to understand. That freedom was bigger than the money. The real test came one Saturday afternoon. I was in the backyard, assembling a grill. The instructions were terrible, and I'd already attached one panel backward when I heard a car stop out front. I looked through the gaps in the fence. Dad. Olivia. For a second, I considered going inside. Then I changed my mind. This was my home. I wasn't hiding inside it. I wiped my hands on an old rag and walked toward the front gate. They were standing on the sidewalk. Dad looked older. Not dramatically, but softer somehow. Deflated. Olivia looked worse. No carefully styled hair. No expensive bag. No polished business owner persona. Just my sister in jeans and a faded jacket. Staring at the house, like she was calculating how much it had cost me. Dad spoke first. "Willa, we need to talk." I stayed behind the gate. "About..." Olivia stepped closer. "Come on. You know what? I'd rather hear you say it." She exhaled. "We need help." There it was. Not "we miss you." Not "we're sorry." Help. Dad gave her an irritated glance, like she'd moved too quickly. Then, he tried a softer approach. "We've had time to think." That must have been exhausting. His mouth tightened. Old Willa would have worried about sounding disrespectful. New Willa didn't care. "We shouldn't have handled the meeting the way we did," he said. "Handlu. Interesting word. Not we were wrong. Not we treated you horribly. They regretted the method. Not the belief." Olivia swallowed. "We messed up." I waited. "We shouldn't have said you weren't family." "Why?" She frowned. "What do you mean? Why shouldn't you have said it?" "Because it wasn't true." I studied her. "Wasn't it?" "No." "Then why did everybody agree?" Neither answered. I leaned against the fence. "You had an entire meeting about me. You didn't invite me. You called me arrogant. Judgmental. Exhausting. Then Mom told me I wasn't welcome and said you were done carrying me." Desaihu. "We were angry." "No." I shook my head. "You were honest." His eyes narrowed. "You keep saying that." "Because it's true." I looked from him to Olivia. "You finally said out loud how you saw me." The only mistake was assuming I'd still pay afterward. Olivia's voice dropped. "Please." That word sounded foreign coming from her. "Just help us stabilize things." "No." She blinked. "Willa." "No." The house could be gone. "I know." "Dad's business. Not mine. My credit is destroyed. You forged loans in my name." Her face hardened. I said I was sorry. "No. You said you were going to pay them back." That was basically an apology. I laughed once. "No. It really wasn't." Dad stepped closer to the gate. "Your mother could lose her home." I looked at him. "So could you? You're really going to stand there and let that happen?" The old programming stirred for half a second. "Fix it. You're the responsible one." Don't let things fall apart. Then I looked behind me. My yard. My half-built grill. My garage. My life. And the feeling vanished. Yes. Dad stared at me. You'll regret this. That line landed differently now. I opened the gate just enough to step closer. No. My voice stayed calm. What I regret is wasting half my life trying to earn a seat at your table. Neither moved. I paid bills. Fixed emergencies. Covered taxes. Saved the house. Protected Olivia's business. Paid medical expenses. Kept insurance active. I looked at Dad, and somehow I was still the daughter you could throw away. His face tightened. That isn't fair. I almost smiled. Fair. Olivia shifted uncomfortably. I continued. I spent years bringing food to the table and wondering why nobody saved me a chair. The street was quiet. Even Dad had nothing to say. So here's the good news. I opened the gate a little wider. I finally realized I wasn't a guest. I pointed toward them. I was the waiter. Olivia looked down. Well? The waiter quit. Dad's jaw clenched. We're still your family. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I nodded. Funny. I pulled my phone from my pocket. Because family doesn't hold meetings to exile one person. He looked away. Family doesn't forge her signature. Olivia flinched. Family doesn't take hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of support and then call the person providing it arrogant. Neither spoke. And family doesn't suddenly remember she's family when the ATM shuts down. Olivia's eyes filled. For 1 second. She looked like the little girl from those birthday parties. The one surrounded by balloons while I carried soda behind her, maybe once. That would have softened me. But Olivia wasn't 10 anymore. And neither was I. Please? Willa. Her voice broke. I don't know what to do. That was probably the most honest sentence I'd ever heard her say. I believed her. She genuinely didn't know. Nobody had ever required her to know. Mom and Dad always rescued her. Then I did. Now, there was nobody left. I could have given her advice. Could have explained budgeting, employment, bankruptcy options, selling assets, starting over, but that would have been another form of rescue. So, I simply said, you'll figure it out. Her expression changed. Recognition. She'd heard those words before. My parents had said them about me for years. Willa always figures things out. Now Olivia finally understood what that actually meant. Dad stepped forward again. We didn't raise you to be this cold. Something inside me almost laughed. No. I looked him directly in the eye. You raised me to survive without you. That shut him up. I stepped backward through the gate. Olivia watched me. So that's it. Yes. You're just done. I thought about it, then answered carefully. You were done first. I closed the gate. Dad grabbed the top rail. Willa. I stopped. If you show up here again, without being invited, I'll call the police. His face changed. Shock. Then anger. Then something closer to embarrassment. They weren't used to boundaries with me. They were used to access. Access to my money, my time, my patience, my forgiveness. That access was gone. Dad released the fence. Olivia whispered something to him. They turned, walked toward the car. Neither looked back. I stood there until the engine started. Until the car pulled away. Until the street became quiet again. Then I returned to the backyard. My grill was still half assembled. The side panel was still backward. I laughed at myself. Removed it. And started again. That evening, I finally got the thing working. I put a steak over the flame, opened a drink, sat in a chair beneath the trees. The breeze was cold enough that I pulled my sleeves down over my wrists. My phone rested face down on the table. No missed calls, no emergency messages, no overdue bills belonging to someone else. I looked around. At the fence, the garage, the little patch of grass, the kitchen light glowing through the window. Nothing about it was glamorous. Nobody would have looked at that small house and called it an empire. But every brick was mine. Every payment was mine. Every mistake was mine to make. And every quiet evening belonged to me. For years, my family convinced me independence meant accepting neglect without complaining. They were wrong. Independence wasn't being alone because nobody chose you. It was choosing who had access to your life. They told me I could quit pretending I was part of their family. So I did. And once I stopped carrying them, I finally learned how light my own life could be.